Welcome to the pre-SONA broadcast ahead of the State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa. If you recall, in May 2019, the African National Congress won the majority of the vote in the 6th national election since 1994. And today, to unpack the State of the Nation, which will be the second one for this year, we have in studio the former Deputy Minister of Foreign or International Relations and Cooperation, Mr. Frans, and we also have the head of Telesur Africa, Clever Banganai. So, Mr. Fransman, Mr. Banganai, as we unpack, sort of the SONA and what President Ramaphosa will focus on in this State of the Nation, and I think it's important probably to set or to inform the viewers that this is the second one for this year. So, what can we really expect in two States of the Nations in 1 year from the same president? Mr. Fransman, we'll start with you.
Fazlin, what we're having is, in fact, every 5 years there's an election, as you'd know. South Africa had, since 1994, on time set national elections, provincial elections, and local elections. And I think that's something that South Africans needs to celebrate. We must celebrate the fact that we came from a very difficult space in our time historically. This year it's the 25th year of our young democracy. If you look at the world and if you look at Africa in particular, then you would pick up that what has happened historically, liberation movements and the democratic dispensations come under pressure 20 years to 30 years into the liberation period. South Africa is not different to that. What we've seen, I think it was early last year, after the ruling party, the African National Congress, after its national conference, we saw that there was, differently to normality, where you would find more cohesion in the first part, in that first 2 years after a conference. There was a little bit of disruptions and fracturing of the organization still. And that resulted into the resignation of the former President Zuma. That then led us into should I say, State of the Nation address, and then early this year, a State of the Nation address, but correctly so. The first State of the Nation address after the 5 years is only now. And that means it's an interesting time. South Africa is faced with lots of contradictions, amongst other poverty, the disparity between wealth and poverty. Our Gini coefficient, if not the highest in the world, is extremely high, and that is the gap between wealth and poverty. We are having a persistency of unemployment close to 15%. We've seen over the last couple of months issues around allegations of fraud, corruption, and should I say the disruptions in governance processes. And that's some of the challenges that President Ramaphosa will have to be confronting, not necessarily from operational issues tonight, but purely based on strategy, on visionary, on, in a sense, showing to the country that he's got the ability to lead the nation, not to lead only the party, not only to lead a particular section of society, but broadly to lead the nation. And that is some of the things that we'll be looking for.
So in his previous State of the Nations, a lot of the theme was around hope. So there was this whole campaign slogan, which then resulted into the ANC's campaign around Tumamina. And I think in the initial phases, since he, sort of took over as caretaker president, there was a little bit of euphoria, both in the markets as well as amongst people, because for some other reason, people were optimistic about the new trend that we were on. But since that State of the Nation, we've seen the economy contract, we've seen job losses, and despite the fact that the president made proclamations in the previous State of the Nation around Job Summit and other summits that he wanted to hold, the question is in the period, and we have to judge him based on what he's done in the year or year and a half that he's been in office, what has been achieved based on what he said in the first State of the Nation address where he came to power versus where we're sitting tonight? And I'll put the question to you, Clever.
Thank you, Fazlin. I think what has happened in the first State of the Nation this year was for the president to put in sort of a roadmap of where the country is going to go. I don't think that people would have expected anything to happen before the elections in May. So even the market itself, what they've been expecting is to wait and see exactly what happens after the elections. I think now this State of the Nation is actually the one that is going to now take the country forward. He's going now to put, I think we expect him to put on the 5 issues that he discussed in February, that he can now then put those things into action, and then the market will start to respond. Unfortunately, South Africa is not immune or cushioned from what is happening in the world. The world is still having economic depression. There's very few countries that have come out of the 2008 depression that we have had. What we're expecting now is for the president to give a captain's role to move the ship ahead so that the whole country, which means the labor, the private sector, the government, can move forward to take in all those steps that they've put in as government so that they can stimulate the economy going forward.
Thank you, Clever. We'll take a few-minute break and come back. We'll start unpacking what the president will be speaking about this evening, as well as what are the key issues that we're facing as the country, and perhaps a few timelines to what Clever mentioned around the key points that he made in the previous State of the Nation. And we are back ahead of the State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa. In studio, we have former Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Marius Fransman, as well as Head of Telesur Africa, Clever Banganai. I'll go to you, Mr. Fransman. We did speak a bit about the journey South Africa's come to this point, but 25 years after democracy, we still have some of the key issues that plague us around poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And we've just seen in the first quarter of this year, 1, the economy shrinking quite substantially, and 2, a massive draining of job losses. So within that context, what do you think the president will outline in terms of, 1, curbing what seems to be just a flow of job losses on the one hand, and 2, what are we going to do to stimulate the economy?
I think, as I've indicated earlier, what we are sitting with is a reality of an economy that's got serious challenges. And the problem currently is there's an over-reliance on the market to resolve those problems. If you look at unemployment, if you look at poverty, if you look at the disparities, that somehow what's required is actually not a trickle-down effect. Mm-hmm. Something that's required is not the economy that is biased to the markets and not address somehow the industrialization question. Now we are going towards the 4th industrial revolution, and we are dealing with manufacturing, so we hope, or I hope, that the president would be able to articulate very strongly, how do we balance this inequality issue? Because the ruling party's position at Nasrec is clear on radical transformation. It's very clear when it comes to land redistribution. It's very clear when it comes to decentralization processes and local economic development. It is clear on what you can call PAKISA, ocean economy. The ocean economy, a project in South Africa, if you look at the ocean, then the current economic value in South Africa, we get around about 45 billion from the ocean. But the economy has the potential, the ocean economy has a potential of 178 billion. So there's growth potential. The strategic question then is, in whose interest is that growth potential? And I think what I hope is that the president would be able to answer that question. It is therefore not a reality of pleasing the market internationally. I don't think And I think there's an over-biasness currently erupting where we must think what the market will do, what the market will say. That's important. But if the market plays us, if the market plays South Africa, then it means we are pleasing the market. And not only in South Africa, but globally. So if you take what happened a few years ago with the economic crunch in America, and if you look at some of those indicators and the Moody's of this world, that was found wanting in the way their analysis and their predictions were. We must assess, and I hope that the presidency would be able to assess the role of the market in the context of what happened the last couple of years. And why is there suddenly out of a 15th year, in this 15th year, it's the highest level of unemployment that we are seeing. Even though all these issues were identified and addressed, and I think that's really the bigger debate, the way I see it. So if the ruling party can align, and the presidency are able to align much more, the link between the party, policy positions, as well as the government and the presidential articulation of decisions. So that there needs to be coherence. Then under that, what we must get right in the 25 years of a democracy, I think it is the fragmentation of the South African state is too big. So you've got local, you've got provincial, and you've got national. If the national government decide that there's going to be special economic zones, if a province or a municipality decide, yes, there can be a special economic zone, but we have issues that you don't consult us, then in law, there is concurrent pieces of legislation. And those concurrent pieces of legislation is an inhibiting factor for growth and development, and in a sense to deal with job creation opportunities. Whether you look at Kuga, whether you look at Saldanha, IDZ, those are the contradictions. And what I think is important that President Ramaphosa will be starting to address the fragmentation of the South African state and to create a more integrated process. Those are some of the, should I say, systemic issues that needs to be dealt with.
So that's a very valid point, because I think one of the key things also to think about is to perhaps take what you said and juxtapose it to, some of the statements made in the previous State of the Nation, specifically the one in February, where the state's ability to manage things was called into question. So, for example, we were looking at things like Eskom, and the president, and some would say quite ideologically different to what his party represents, has kind of taken South Africa on the path, or some would say, on the path towards the privatization of Eskom, and analysts would say that first step was breaking up Eskom into several components to be able to do that. So Clever, from your side, how would you unpack that, and what do you think he'll touch on? Because Eskom is, if you look at it in pure monetary terms, it is a drain on the state. How are we going to get things in order, especially considering that the CEO of Eskom has also resigned?
No, you're right. I mean, Eskom is a very big animal. Eskom is divided into generation, into transmission, and also into distribution. Those are big sectors of Eskom that some economists think that they should be managed separately. Whether that is going to help Eskom or not, we have to wait and see. But it has also raised a little bit of some concern in the labor market, because in doing such things, they're thinking that you're going to be restructuring and getting new companies in place and so on, and that is going to lead into job losses. But in terms of whether it's going to make Eskom more efficient, that has to be seen in that. But what we think is going to help the country is that if you look at Eskom, it is the driving force of the economy of South Africa, because that's where we get the energy from. And also the incentives for foreign investment to come into the country, they would look whether there's energy security in the country and so on. But Eskom also, on its own, it's driving a big market in manufacturing, because if Eskom is working, manufacturing is going to work. If manufacturing is going to work, mining is going to work. So all those things, they need to be coordinated properly so that we can create the jobs that we require. But I think also what the president should do is to give guidance in how these things are going to be done, so that it doesn't give contradictions in the market. Because if there is a big pushback from the labor market, the restructuring of ESCOM is going to take time, and it's going to get a lot of, and that is going to bring in incoherence in terms of pushing the jobs that we want to create in that. So he needs to play his cards very well in trying to convince both sides, the private sector as well as the labor movement, in that this is a good move to go forward, but in that way also buying in people that want to come and invest. We have another, I think, another sector that is in the energy that has now been put into mining. We're looking at the issue of providing energy in terms of renewables. That has also brought in a lot of contradiction in the market in terms of who is actually benefiting this. Do we have the capacity to drive this economy using that type of energy? So we have to look into all those sort of things, and then drive the skills that drive that type of economy. Do we have enough skills to do the renewable energies? Are we manufacturing the solar panels in South Africa, or are we just importing them and coming to install? How do we get those things to balance up so that we can create those jobs that we want? So he needs to look into that. So how the money is going to be put in terms of skills development to get this economy. I mean, think Marius has said it, that we are going into the fourth industrial revolution. How do you balance those things so that you don't lose jobs, but you get everybody to get into the economy? And then you look into your tertiary education, how you're going to make them so that they can come and help the economy to go forward in this manner.
So we've had some really interesting discussions, just unpacking what the president will be focusing on in his State of the Nation address this evening. And when we come back, we're going to be focusing on two very controversial issues, and that is the issue of land expropriation without compensation, as well as the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. And we're back prepping for the State of the Nation with President Cyril Ramaphosa. We're going to unpack what we think he will be speaking about, and hopefully outlining, what his plans are for this year and probably the next 5 years of this administration. In studio, we have former Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Marius Fransman, as well as Head of Telesur Africa, Clever Banganyani. And so I think one of the things, probably the most sticky issue or issues for this current administration will probably be two issues that came up at the ANC's Nasrec conference, and that is touching on land expropriation without compensation, as well as the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. And we've seen, in the weeks leading up to SONA and following the election, there was a lot of contestation, specifically around the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. So, Mr. Fransman, we'll start with you. Do you think that the president, to be honest, and his administration, because obviously it's not him alone, is actually going to follow through on ANC policies, these two specific ANC policies?
I will get to that point, but I think it's important to say that what South Africa now needs is strong, coherent, directive leadership. I think that's very clear. The contradictions are too big. And therefore what we need is a coherent leadership. We need a coherent presidency, and we definitely need a coherent alignment with the ruling party, as well as within the ruling party. We need coherence between the Secretary General and the President. That's what we require. That's not, in a sense, elections are over. And where we stand, that's non-party political actors in that exercise, is that South Africa requires, as Clever said, hope, but it requires action with that hope. And yeah?
But do you think that because I want to, you make a very valid point that there seems to be a divide between the president of the ANC and the SG of the ANC. Do you think that ideological divide is just too wide for them to be on the same page, especially around these issues?
The ruling party's policy is the most important thing. And therefore the policy, because the president is the leader of the country, he's equally also the leader of the party. And therefore, from where I'm sitting, if there's a will, there's a way. If they sit down and make sure there's coherence between the leadership as well as the policy trajectory. And why that becomes critical is because the primary motive force of the African National Congress in strategy and tactics after strategy and tactics, and even at the last conference, the primary motive force remains the working class. Anything else will be a contradiction. And hence, if, leaders don't need to like each other, but leaders needs to, you're in it because of a policy position and what conference resolved. Now, conference has resolved on certain important things. And that's why it's imperative that the leadership, President, SG, and everyone, don't listen possibly to those others that are not part of the coherent leadership of both government and the alliance in this case, generally, and somehow cohere. And the call that I would make, as somebody that served in office, is that somehow leaders must now realize what they are doing to society. If there's fragmentation, society will be fragmented. And I think that's the issue. Now back to your question, in terms of will there be a real interest? For me, where I'm sitting, it will be possible if there is alignment to that issue.
So, Clever, I mean, I find Mr. Fransman's answer to be very diplomatic. But the reality is, though, that the president has contradicted himself on so many occasions on both of those issues. So in certain audiences and to certain audiences, he would say, yes, we're going to, expropriate land without compensation. And then when he speaks to a different audience, he says, well, there are modalities that we need to work out. What is the true message? What is the thing that we believe as a nation? Because I think, irrespective of on which side of the debate you're on, at the end of the day, we want policy certainty from a government perspective. And we want to know what direction the president and his administration is going in. And I don't know if you can answer that question or if you can see into his mind, but do you think this will be something he'll even touch on or address in this State of the Nation?
No, I think it is an important thing. Remember the struggles of African people throughout the continent. Even if you can go beyond the continent, you can go to Latin America, you can go to Asia. The struggles of colonialism was all about land. Dispossessed people want the land back to themselves. And the ANC, if you look at the history of the ANC from 1912 when it was formed, the struggle was about the land. It has not changed. I think that policy document is, you can see in each and every conference, it comes back and comes back. How they are going to implement this policy that they have taken as a policy document is what the modalities of the current government must look. But I'm confident that policy is going to be taken forward, and because this is what people want land back. But you must also understand that this is a very sensitive issue, not only for South Africa, but there's a vested interest in this issue by foreign entities that own the land here in South Africa, but they've got their own other interest in the country. So when you touch land, you are not going to touch only the South African property. I mean, forget about people who own land here. There's people who are out there who have got interest in what South Africa is. So now you would see. I saw, if you analyze, we saw one statement that came last week. I think one of the newspapers, the main newspaper, I think it was News 24, they came up with an article that says South Africa is not going to go into the issue of land as it did with Cuba or Venezuela. South Africa is not going to. But I think that's a misleading statement because when the ANC went into the Nasrec conference, also in the Mangaung conference in Polokwane conference, the issue of land was discussed, and it is a policy that has been taken in different manifestos of the ANC. I think what should happen is that like Marius is saying, that there should be a coherent message that goes back to the electorate to say, we are going to take land, this is how we're going to do it, and we are not going back on that. So that even the investors that come in, they know what is the policy direction of South Africa. So we shouldn't be talking that, no, we're going to take it this way, or we're not going to take it this way. But I think there need to be a direct message that goes in, and people want their land. If you look into the issue of the Reserve Bank, it's also an issue that is maybe a lot of a layman in the street does not understand what is the issue about the Reserve Bank.
So that's a valid point, because I want to touch on it, because there's been a little bit of, in the media and generally, when there was a contestation, you could put it this way, between the Minister of the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, and the SG, just around the issue of Reserve Bank. And a lot of commentators took a very and I don't know how to phrase it, but a bit of a superiority complex way of looking at it, when they said that, well, when ANC delegates went to Nazareth and voted for this policy, they didn't understand it. And I don't know, I mean, there are so many delegates, I don't know how many delegates was at the conference, and it's not an objective sort of point to make, but do you think that has any, because you're right, the ordinary person on the street is not going to understand what exactly needs to change from the Reserve Bank. But do you think that plays a role, or, that we're trying to be pushed in a certain direction?
I think also what maybe might not be there in the public is exactly what was discussed at Nazareth. I think one of the things that was discussed there was to expand the mandate of the Reserve Bank, instead of only focusing on the few issues of inflation and other things that the Reserve Bank does on the fiscal policy of the country, but also look into the issues of creating employment. And so how do you use your Reserve Bank to try and stimulate the economy? When in 2008, when we went into the recession, the other governments in the world, they also went and did the same thing on this. So it's just to make sure that policy is one voice and people understand what is going on. I don't know what you...
And that's exactly the contradiction. I think what Claire is saying, that's exactly the contradiction currently. So, somehow I call it the politics of deception, because what is happening is the market and those messages, those superiority messages, is being used to suppress the progressive positioning into the South African, should I say, economy. We must accept that 90% plus of the JSE in South Africa is still being controlled by those that controlled it prior to 94. We must accept that at least 80% of the land is still in the hands of those that has controlled it prior to 94. We must accept that the means of production in South Africa is not yet in the hands of our people. Those are the facts. And therefore the policy positions of the ruling party has spoken very loudly about it. Your point about being diplomatic, in fact, it is our hope that the alignment will be biased not to individuals, that the alignment is biased to that very policy positions that a organization that lived 106 years old already has articulated. And that's the contradiction here. Show me a country in the world where the Reserve Bank do not belong to the nation. Show me a country in the world where the land has not been corrected. The point that Clever made about Cuba, about Venezuela, the reality of Venezuela and the reality of what's happening in Venezuela. Let's just think for a moment. Why is there suddenly, this country has over many years have had the best salary for their workers in the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean. Suddenly there is an eruption of big issues. Why? Because it's the largest oil block reserve in the world, in one country. It's the second largest deposit for gold. And what has happened? Sanctions has crept in. How does sanction creep in? Because the US has taken a particular decision. Not necessarily military, but the last force. It starts with economic disposition. It starts with using financial instruments. It starts with how the dollar vis-a-vis the other currencies are operating. What is happening in South Africa? Firstly, we should accept that there's so many contradictions, and the biasness in the ANC policy positions are clear for nationalization when it comes to certain very particular things. It should be on land, and it should be on the National Bank. 2, you cannot have any more situation where then many moons ago we said the ANC is a broad church. And a broad church means you've got all these different pressure points in one space. But the primary motor force remains the working class. Today we cannot in the future talk about that. And because in the future we must now speak about what is our policy positions. Because it boils now not down to personalities, it boils down to very hard positions. And that is really where we're going in. So I believe that President Ramaphosa can't actually speak anymore about trying to please everyone. The ANC ruling party cannot please everyone. It must take the position that it has taken at its policy conference.
I think also to pick up on what Marius is saying, I agree with you 100%. We must look at the examples of countries that have taken that stance. I mean, let's look at China. You look, I mean, the policy is decided for the next 10 years, and what they do is they roll on the policy. There's no contradiction in those 10 years that comes. They put in, if it's infrastructure, if it's development, if it's international relations, the policy is decided and it's going to be taken in. Obviously, they have some midterm reviews that they do every 5 years, but it's on those issues. I think that's what is brought mostly, but that comes with democracy. I mean, when you have democracy, you have to try and please everybody. But the thing is, like you're saying, we have to take that stance, right? Let's look into what the issue of the land is saying. I mean, he's mentioned countries like Venezuela and Cuba in terms of country, but you can go to our neighbors here in Zimbabwe. They have taken the issue of land. They had their own method of taking the land back. But what has happened is those countries, yes, the people have the land, but those countries are now being used by United States as examples of bad practice. And that is what is being given to South Africans. If you do this, you're going to be like this. What do they do with those countries? They put them under sanctions or under blockade, just to make sure that South Africans are on the right peg. But that's again what you need to see as South African. Do you decide to take that and get the brunt of the imperialist in terms of trying to hammer you on things that you've done, or do you rely on doing small progressive things, and then you would have a sort of a spring, South African spring actions that comes from there, or you actually take a decision to go on with that?
And the last point on it, Fazlin, is that we must depersonalize policy positions. We must depersonalize. We should not have a situation where we aspire to be having American type of leaders, because we are not an individually driven society. We're supposed to deal with the contradictions that we're still faced with. And I think there is this clamoring of Americanized approach to our politics. Yes, there's indoctrination historically. I'm trying to appreciate the fact that there's one policy position that said we have to start from school, ensuring that what is a good citizenry in society. Now the contradiction is that indoctrination. But whether you go to America, whether you go to European countries, whether you go to old Soviet countries, etc., all of those countries speak about good citizenry. What is those 10 principles for a child to grow up with a passionate approach and patriotic responsibility to society? That's the decisions that South Africa will have to take. I'm very clear that the contradictions will continue, it will emerge, but our hope is that the president will rise to the occasion and not only appease the market.
And now that kind of concludes our pre-discussion of the State of the Nation address, and it will be interesting to see if some of the points that we touched on is actually touched on by the President. Specifically, I think the two latter points that we spoke about, which was the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, but also land expropriation without compensation. And that actually reminds me of something that Saul Plaatje said, who was the Secretary General, or one of the first Secretary Generals of the ANC. He said in 1913, on this day, he said the black person woke up on Friday, the 20th of June, 1913, in a country where the land was not his own, because just the day before, on Thursday, the 19th of June, the Land Act was passed. So this is a very significant day, I think, in South Africa's history, and it will be interesting to see if President Ramaphosa will rise to the challenge and say, you know what, it has been more than 100 years where black people in South Africa have been pariahs in their own land, and the time now is to go into the next century and say that, you know, the tides are turning. But with that, we implore all of you to join us as we watch the State of the Nation address.